Hey everyone, Psychedelic leader Atai Life Sciences announced their latest earnings last week. This company is led by strategic investor and founder Christian Egermeyer, CEO Florian Brand, and another strategic investor in Peter Thiel. As mentioned, they're viewed as the leader within this space and are already garnering attention from big pharma. Why? Find out now in our latest podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to the Dales Report, and I am happy to be joined. A big guest here this morning, the CEO of Atai Life Sciences, which trades on the NASDAQ under the ticker symbol ATAI. Florian Brand joins us. Florian, been about 8 or 9 months, but great to have you back. How are things?
Great, and thanks for having us again on your show. Really appreciate it.
Y-
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say things are what? I cut you off there.
Yeah, no, things are really great. I mean, we're facing turbulent times in biotech, of course. Um, at the same time, we feel in a very, very strong position with 335 million in cash, as we announced in our earnings call, to deliver on the execution of our existing pipeline, to basically deliver on our vision to heal mental health disorders. Rough times, yet in a very strong position to execute on our mission and also deliver on our R&D catalysts this
Yeah.
year and beyond.
Well, a lot of people I've spoken to have said, full disclosure, I do have a position in Atai Life Sciences, but I will say long term, a lot of people I've spoken to in the biotech industry look at your company specifically as an incredible buy, an incredible entry point right now, knowing like you said, the amount of cash that you have, the amount of runway, the cost of clinical trials, the diversification. But we haven't spoken in 9 months. If you look at the industry as a whole, what's the big takeaway that you can look at over the past year with regards to the industry? And if you're in front of a group of investors and outside of the Atai story, what are key questions that you think investors should be asking? And most importantly, the message that you want to get through as far as the biggest takeaways this industry has developed over the past 12 months?
Yeah, yeah, industry. I think like starting with the biotech industry again. I think turbulent times, as everyone would acknowledge, you're really basically trading on the level. If you look at the XBI biotech index, on
Yeah,
the level of 5 years ago, like even below May 2017. And during that time, there has been so much value created in biotech as a sector in general, across all therapeutic areas. But if we look at neuropsychiatry in particular, with the mental health crisis really escalating, that there was already 1 billion people that were suffering before the pandemic. But recent studies have shown that the number of the depression rates and the rates in other mental health indications are really on the rise, triggered by the COVID
right.
pandemic. So there's an extremely increase in unmet need in that specific indications. Yet we have seen very little innovations over the last 20 years. And I think with Atai, we put together a very interesting, very diverse pipeline that addresses many of those unmet needs, that addresses the heterogeneous patient population, because there is not this one size fits all solution. We need multiple approaches, and I believe with Atai we are well positioned with our approach, and that goes back then to your questions: what do we highlight when we talk to investors, and why we believe Atai is a great investment opportunity? We are basically addressing many of those unmet needs and have
Right.
deployed, in our perspective, a very thoughtful de-risking strategy on an asset level. So we are looking at assets that have prior evidence in humans. So basically to skip the translational risk that you often face in drug development from animal models to humans, which is in particular challenging in neuropsychiatry. So that's the asset level. And psychedelics are one of the key components of our pipeline where that holds true in particular, right? There's centuries of evidence, anecdotal evidence that points to the safety and efficacy of those compounds when administered in the right setting, but also it holds true for many of our non-psychedelics compounds that we have in development that we're equally excited about. So that's, I think, one of the key takeaways. And
Yeah.
the other one is that in terms of de-risking, we have this portfolio approach. So we're not betting on this one single or two assets. this diversified,
Which is a lot of the story for companies within this space, right? So
right.
when we talk about diversification, it's maybe elaborate a little bit more on that. And obviously, most importantly, the overall cost when it comes to a lot of the trials, which explains the importance of having a long runway.
Totally. So we're having. I think our advantage was that we started very early. 4 years ago, there was not this hype around psychedelics, so we could actually look at many of the psychedelic compounds, and talk to many of the leading researchers in this field, and then compile a very thoughtful approach when it comes to psychedelics, and also other compounds that basically looked at as I said, prior evidence, and then build a pipeline that has multiple shots on goal, that is not dependent on the outcome of one specific trial, one specific compound, or one specific compound developed for one specific indication. So that was important to us. And to your point, those trials do cost a lot of money. Drug development is important. That's also why important to have a strong IP patent portfolio or patent protections, because the money that you invest, you need to recoup at some point. That's the
Of
whole
course.
the reason for why there is IP. If you invest a lot in R&D, not only in biotech, also in other sectors, there's good reasons why there needs to be a time to recoup that. Um,
Absolutely.
and yeah, that's what we've been focused on. And to your point, are in a well capitalized position with 335 million to deliver on all those trials. We anticipate to have 10 of our compounds in the clinic by end of this year. And this pipeline, this diverse pipeline, also allows for a lot of news flows. And that's also what's interesting for investors, that they don't have to wait, if you look at a one asset biotech company, for a year or so to have a meaningful readout coming up. For us, it's really a nice density of R&D catalysts over the next years to come.
Which is great. I always say to investors in this space at this stage, when it comes to earnings, and your latest earnings was early last week, investors should look for research expenditures coming within budget and whether you're advancing your pipeline, your clinical pipeline. And based on last week's news, you delivered on both fronts, finishing the quarter, as you said, with 335 million in cash and advancing at least 3 clinical trial studies. Can you maybe talk a little bit about those clinical trial studies and what is the key takeaway that I guess investors should look for as you develop these pipelines along for the remainder of the calendar year?
Totally. I think the most important catalyst that is coming up is PCN 101, that we are developing for TRD or in TRD, treatment resistant
Yeah.
depression. That's a phase 2 a proof of concept study that basically looks at the R enantiomer. So there's a racemic mixture, of ketamine that has historically shown also to be helpful for depressed patients. There are ketamine clinics in the US, for instance, that use that treatment off-label for depression and other mental health
Mm-hmm.
disorders. And
Mm-hmm.
Spravato got approval in 2019 for, J&J got approval for Spravato S-ketamine. So Spravato is the commercial name, the brand name for S-ketamine in 2019. And since then, they have rolled out that across the country, that this S-ketamine is bound to the clinic. So it's an in-clinic treatment. It needs to be basically administered under supervision because it has dissociative effects. And in the meanwhile, we have 1,088 clinics when we looked the last time across the US that have been licensed to actually administer S-ketamine, which is very encouraging
Yep.
for mental health patients, as it's also reimbursed, unlike off-label treatments. So that's great news for patients. And R-ketamine, the key differentiator here is that we're developing it for an at-home treatment. So it would be
Okay.
the first rapid-acting antidepressant for at-home use when we can demonstrate that we achieve efficacy at tolerable dissociative or no dissociation as measured by the CATS scale. So that's what we're
How would
looking forward to end of this year.
how would that work, Florian, when you say at home?
Yeah, so basically, we want to demonstrate in this trial that we achieve a very, very rapid drop on the MADRS. That's basically the depression scale that is widely used. That is not dissimilar to what you've seen with esketamine or also psilocybin. There's first open label data with R-ketamine in TRD patients that
Yep.
showed at the 24-hour mark after administration a nice drop of around about 20 points on the MADRS, which is quite significant. But it also showed, and that's what I alluded to earlier, on the CAT scale in the study, that is a scale for dissociation, that there was basically no dissociation. So anything below a 4 on the CAT scale is considered normal, and that was what we seen to be the case in that small study. So that's encouraging, and we want to replicate, show that those results also hold true in a wider, broader population. And we're running the trial in Europe and in the US. And this is the no dissociation component is important because due to that dissociation, S-ketamine and also ketamine needs to be administered in an inpatient clinic. Same also for the 5-HT2 agonists like psilocybin,
Right.
where you have like those hallucinogenic effects. They need
Yeah.
to be administered under supervision. Here we believe we can have, if you want, well, you have basically a non-dissociative psychedelic-like compound that seems to be very efficacious based on the data that we have. And hence we believe we can actually develop this as an at-home treatment, addressing then a larger market because it doesn't have to be bound to the clinic when it's administered.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, it would
It's
be, I
it,
mean, it would be, I think, a big step forward, and clearly differentiates would differentiate from esketamine. Again, I think it's already a big advancement, but it's quite still a burden for also the patients to commute to the
of
doctors
course,
often,
of course.
frequently to basically receive the dosing. So that would be, yeah, here a step forward, and could address a larger patient population.
IP is big. IP is huge. You've been doing this for 4 years now. Long runway. You look at the cost of clinical trials. You have a runway of 1 to 2 years, which your CFO was talking about in the post earnings call. One other thing I actually noticed too in the post earnings call was senior biotechnology analyst and managing director at Cohen, Ritu Barra, asked what lessons that your company Atai has learned from the actual
Right.
disappointing commercial rollout of Johnson and Johnson's, as you said, esketamine drug named Spravato. To which you answered that Atai could learn a lot from those experiences and use lessons learned to its advantage. Do you want to elaborate on what you meant by that?
Yeah, I think first of all, that's what I said earlier. I think, yet it might be behind what people expected in terms of commercial success. I think it's a great success for patients to have a reimbursed, rapid-acting antidepressant, an alternative to what we have today or what we had until then, available and also reimbursed by payers. I think that's a great signal that there is potential for dissociative alternative treatments in neuropsychiatry. And I think what's also important is, in hindsight, you're always smarter, right? So I think here it works in our advantage to be not the first mover in this
Yes.
field because we can
Okay.
leverage that infrastructure that J&J built out now. So 1,088 clinics are a great starting point for us when we basically get, or when we are in the position to commercialize our compounds, because we are actually developing or designing our second generation compound, for instance, or second generation therapies, the DMT assisted psychotherapy that we are developing in conjunction with our digital therapeutics to fit into that Spravato paradigm of 2 hours of treatment in clinic. And
Okay.
we anticipate a certain redosing frequency with our therapies. So having an infrastructure that we can use as the basis to build upon is very, 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 yeah, it's a good starting point for us because we don't need to start from scratch. We can basically leverage the education that was done so far, like, because it was, let's be honest, it was a paradigm shift in psychiatry. And there were no dissociative compounds approved until then. So physicians and also patients had to get used to, and also payers, a lot of stakeholders in this field had to be educated, and had this paradigm had to be established. And that's what we believe will benefit from when our therapies eventually will be commercialized.
When I look at the people involved in this company from a management standpoint, some of the strategic investors that you have involved, these are global thought leaders to say the least. What would you say is the biggest difference from where you started, say, 4 years ago, pertaining to the industry to where we are today? Like, how much advancement and education are different healthcare providers, government officials receiving? And, take me into that room. Like, what are the conversations that you're having? And the positive, I guess, outtake that a lot of people are keeping an open mind related to this industry compared to where it was, say, 4 years ago.
Yeah, I think the most important part to emphasize here is that we have been generating a lot more data over the last years, and ultimately data will be the currency that will convince all those stakeholders to yeah, be more be supportive also going forward. I think we've been seeing with the FDA granting breakthrough therapy designations to MAPS and Compass, already a big
Hmm.
openness and a
Hmm.
curiosity among regulators to support the research, the rigorous research of those compounds. And
Right.
then MAPS and Compass with COMP360 and MDMA assisted therapies both really showed great data. So MAPS showed that I think 67% that of people that were diagnosed with PTSD basically before the therapy basically after undergoing the MUA assisted therapy, weren't qualified as PTSD patients anymore after the therapy, um, compared to around about 30% to the placebo arm. So that's great results and great news. And Compass basically showed unseen large effect sizes with their therapy, COMP360 therapy that with their phase 2b study. And I think that is really encouraging. So the 6.6 delta that they demonstrated between the 1 milligram quote unquote placebo arm and their 25 milligram arm was really encouraging. And the durability of effect was also very encouraging. So I think we have to be very much focused on generating further data. And for us, the PCN 101 data will be kind of the next milestone here. And then basically use those data points that we generate, because again, I think that is the best thing that we can do to convince all the stakeholders, engage early on in discussions. And that was also one of the lessons
Right.
learned. You have to be very early, lessons learned when we look at J&J and Spravato, be very early to engage all the stakeholders, payers, physicians, also patients advocacy groups, to highlight what progress we are making. Um, and I think you had another question that I'm currently blanking on.
I was gonna bring it up. I can't remember what it was, but I did want to follow up to say, when you look at the pipeline and the research that's being done, it's a tough question to answer right now. But how optimistic do you feel on the research that you're providing and the outcome that will take place? I know it's still early, but I think the big key takeaway is what you said is the data that's being, manufactured through a lot of this research and a lot of people that are still unfamiliar with the industry. It's the perception that the stigma that I think people have to further be
Right.
educated, and we really have to push the narrative when it comes to the whole biotech side. But the number one thing that I always say is the amount of efficacy that's being generated towards this industry and how that is like the eye opener for a lot of companies. But most importantly, will be the difference maker, obviously, in whether a company succeeds and doesn't. So, based off of that, what's your take on a lot of the research that you're doing right now and the direction that you're going?
Yeah. I think the key difference also comparing us to other therapeutic areas in biotech is that, again, we have this wealth of anecdotal evidence and sometimes even more so when it comes to psychedelics, but also when we look at our non-psychedelics compounds that we have in development. The common denominator is, again, this prior evidence of humans on the safety and efficacy side, at least anecdotally. And I think that
Right.
is really unique. And we are building we basically can base a lot of our confidence in that because again that's kind of our de-risking approach and why we deploy it. So we are optimistic that we can increase the likelihood of success through our de-risking approaches on this portfolio approach, multiple shots and goals, and the on the asset level the prior of evidence that I alluded to. And I think what's important here is that also there needs to be, and I think that also a little bit relates to your earlier question, we need to take this data and be very thoughtful of how to present it to also the political thought leaders. And the veterans, I think, will play a key role here, as they
Yeah.
often are very much
Good
affected
point.
by mental health disorders and
Good point.
have been, I think, key to also facilitate discussions with politicians, and that's for Republicans and Democrats. So we see really a
Yeah.
unified interest here, unlike in other political debates. That we
Yeah.
first of all we need like the realization we need better treatments, and they're very curious about psychedelics, especially when the veterans talk about their experiences, how they have been helped with those therapies. So I think, and we were also sponsoring VETS, which is one of the VETS organizations. I think it's really moving to hear their stories and how they have been helped when they were part, for instance, of clinical trials that were ongoing. And I think that's a path that we should continue when we think about how to best engage with those stakeholders.
Yeah, makes sense. Athletes too, I found alarming rate right now with what they're struggling with. I actually was given a stat about a month ago that I was unfamiliar with, but as much as like veterans, and I know that there's a big talking point, and rightfully so. There's a rising stat when it comes to athletes as well worldwide, when it comes to depression and just the effects of playing in careers and stuff.
And
Last
also,
thing I wanted to,
I think they're also playing a key role to, you mentioned stigmatization, right? I think they're also
100%.
playing a key role to destigmatize further. And it's
Yeah,
really, really great to see that they are really courageous to be vulnerable in front kind of every, like the global media, to come out and make a point to prioritize their own mental health. And I think that is very important to also encourage the broader public to be more
of
openly
course.
addressing and prioritizing their own mental health. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, last thing I wanted to bring up too is we speak to a lot of investors on Discord and Reddit, and we all wanted to ask, like, what is your thoughts of Atai? Everybody looks at you as the leader within the space right now. Like I said, cashed up, diversification. Number one feedback that does come back as well when it comes to research is simplifying exactly what you're doing, because there's a lot of stuff that's going on, moving parts all at once. So, based on some of that feedback, and if you get questions like that, how do you respond? And what's the key thing that I said that they should focus on from now until, let's say, the end of the year, that they should really focus on what pipelines are being, obviously progressed, and what they should, be aware of as your story continues to develop?
Yeah. So, a tie in a nutshell, what we believe and what we believe is the right approach in mental health is achieving clinical meaningful and sustained behavioral change in mental health patients in those indications that we are active in. And how we do it is basically through three strategic pillars, and they all work together. Pillar number one is pharmacological agents that have strong neuroplastic effects, neuroplastic psychoplastic effects that open up this window of therapy, the therapeutic window, that we can then harness to change the behavior of those patients. And psychedelics are a very great example for those compounds that open up this neuroplasticity window to induce behavioral or harness behavioral change, or harness it to change behaviors in mental health patients. And then we are convinced to actually not only in the short term improve symptoms and get people better, we need to combine those with kind of long-term therapy. And that is basically where our digital therapeutics, our second pillar, come in. So you want to deploy our app in combination with those pharmacological agents to keep people out of their mental health disorders, out of depression, for example, in a very sustainable way. And we want to use our app for this to induce this sustained behavioral change. And then ultimately, we are big believers in, given the heterogeneous patient population, so it's really depressions, not depression, it's anxieties, and anxiety is really unique to the patients, that we want to use the data that we will be hopefully generating through the combination approach on the digital side, but also we're very
Right.
interested in biological biomarkers. So having a data-driven biomarker approach to make all those therapies much more targeted and tailored and personalized to the patient. So that is what Atai is about. Pharmacological, novel, differentiated treatments that we want to combine, especially when it comes to psychedelic-assisted therapies, with our digital therapeutics, and ultimately then use data that we generate along the way to make all those therapies much more targeted and tailored to the patient needs, prevent relapse, or also knowing when it's the best time to redose. So using technology to make a difference truly for patients. And what investors should focus on this year is really, so we will be in the clinic, we anticipate to be in the clinic with 10 compounds. So there we will have a lot of readouts
That's
coming out
big.
on
10
phase one.
compounds. That's
Right,
big.
right. And we will have the first drug app combination in the clinic with Viridiat, our DMT assisted
Yeah.
therapy, by mid of this year. And then the biggest catalyst is what we discussed earlier, certainly PCN 101, the phase 2A proof of concept trial that is reading out towards end of this year, that we're very much looking forward to.
It's great. Great update. Keep up the great work and positive progress that's being made, to say the least. It's really amazing, the development of this industry and the thought leaders that are involved within the space, such as yourself. But this has been great. I appreciate the update. We're going to continue to have a lot of these conversations over the next few months. And it'll be great to get a complete education on exactly what's being done and most importantly, the progress that's being made. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having us again.
All right. Thanks, Florian.
Thanks, Chad.
Thanks for watching. We appreciate you giving this video a thumbs up. We also value your feedback, so leave a comment below. And if you like what we do, then share this video on your socials. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and tap on that bell to receive notifications for all future videos that we post. Thanks for watching.